The radio crackled with static. Then a voice, urgent, strained, barely controlled. Any available aircraft. This is Bravo 3-2. We are taking heavy fire. Multiple casualties. Request immediate medevac. Grid coordinates. The transmission dissolved into noise. Then silence. In the operations center, officers stared at monitors, faces tight with calculation. No helicopters in range. No fighter jets configured for ground support. Nothing that could reach the Marines pinned down in hostile territory before enemy forces overran their position. We have no assets available, the air controller said, the words heavy with defeat. Lieutenant Mara Hollins stood at the back of the room, her flight suit still dusty from the training sortie she'd just completed. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight bun, green eyes fixed on the tactical display. She stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. I can be airborne in 7 minutes. The air controller didn't even turn around. Lieutenant, we're looking for actual combat aircraft, not... The A-10 is a combat aircraft. Now he turned. Behind him, several officers exchanged glances. One of them, Major Garrett, the squadron operations officer, actually smiled, not kindly. Hollins, the Warthog is a museum piece, Garrett said. We need speed and precision, not some Cold War relic that barely flies faster than a crop duster. Those Marines need close air support and ground attack capability, Mara said. That's exactly what the A-10 was built for. What it was built for 40 years ago, Garrett shot back. We need modern solutions. The adults are handling this, Lieutenant. Go file your training report. Mara held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked out of the operations center. But she didn't head toward the administration building. She headed for the flight line. 6 years earlier, Mara Hollins had been a different person. Louder, more certain of her place in the world. She'd grown up on military bases, the daughter of Colonel Frank Hollins, a legendary A-10 pilot who'd flown combat missions in 3 different theaters. She'd learned to fly in his shadow, absorbing every lesson he offered. He'd died when she was 23, engine failure during a routine training flight. The kind of accident that shouldn't happen but sometimes does. At the funeral, dozens of pilots had come to pay respects. Grizzled veterans with decades of service who spoke about Frank Hollins with something close to reverence. They told stories about impossible missions, about how he'd saved entire units with perfectly placed ordnance, about his ability to keep the Warthog in the fight no matter how much damage it took. Your father could make that aircraft do things that shouldn't be possible, one retired colonel had told her. He understood it wasn't about speed or stealth. It was about staying in the battle when everyone else had to leave. After that, Mara had pursued the A-10, not because it was prestigious. It wasn't. The Air Force was retiring the platform, phasing it out in favor of sleeker, faster jets. Assignment to the A-10 was seen as a dead-end posting, a place for pilots who couldn't cut it in the modern aircraft. But Mara didn't care about prestige. She cared about the mission her father had dedicated his life to, protecting the soldiers on the ground, no matter what it cost. She'd spent 2 years flying the Warthog in training missions, learning its quirks and capabilities. Late at night, when the base was quiet, she'd review her father's old flight logs, studying his approach patterns, his tactics, his decision-making under fire. The other pilots didn't understand. They saw her dedication to an obsolete aircraft as stubbornness, or worse, sentimentality. You're too good to waste your career on that thing, one instructor had told her. Transfer to fighters. Make something of yourself. She'd stayed with the A-10, which was why when the emergency call came in, she was the only pilot on base who knew exactly what that aircraft could do. The crew chief looked up in surprise as Mara strode onto the flight line. Lieutenant? I thought you were done for the day. Emergency tasking, Mara said, already climbing the ladder to the cockpit. I need to be wheels up in 6 minutes. Ma'am, I haven't received... Chief, there are Marines dying. I don't have time to wait for paperwork. The crew chief studied her face for a moment. Then he nodded and started pulling chocks. Mara ran through the pre-flight checklist with practiced precision. The A-10 wasn't elegant. It was a massive titanium bathtub with wings, built around a 30mm rotary cannon that could shred armored vehicles. It was slow, ungainly, and considered hopelessly outdated by modern standards. But it could absorb damage that would tear apart any other aircraft. It could loiter over a battlefield for hours. And in the right hands, it could deliver ordnance with surgical precision. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. The Warthog isn't about what looks impressive. It's about what saves lives when everything goes to hell. 4 minutes later, she was taxiing toward the runway. 5 minutes after that, she was airborne. The radio came alive immediately. Unidentified A-10, you are not cleared for departure. Return to... This is Falcon 27, Mara transmitted, using her call sign. En route to support Bravo 32. Someone want to tell those Marines to wait for proper authorization to be in danger? Silence. Then Major Garrett's voice, tight with anger. Lieutenant Hollins, you are in direct violation... Copy that, sir. You can file whatever charges you want after I bring those Marines home. She switched to the tactical frequency. Bravo 32, this is Falcon 27. I'm inbound to your position. Hold tight. The response came through, broken by static and the sound of gunfire. Falcon 27. We've got enemy armor moving on our position. Multiple BMPs and what looks like a T-72. We're pinned down in a ravine. If that armor reaches us, the transmission cut off. Mara checked her navigation. 23 minutes to target at max cruise speed. She pushed the throttles forward, coaxing every bit of speed from the aircraft. The desert landscape blurred beneath her. Mountains rose in the distance, jagged and hostile. Storm clouds were building to the north, whether that would ground most aircraft. But the A-10 had been designed to operate in the worst conditions imaginable. 17 minutes out, she began descending, keeping low to avoid radar detection. The Warthog wasn't stealthy, but at low altitude and rough terrain it became harder to track. Bravo 3-2. What's your status? The Marine's voice was strained. Enemy armor is 200 meters out and closing. We've got wounded who can't move. If you've got anything... I've got a gun that fires freedom at 4,000 rounds per minute, Mara said. Give me a mark on that armor. Friendlies are in a ravine at these coordinates. Enemy armor approaching from the northeast along a ridge line. Mara pulled up the tactical display, overlaying the coordinates. The situation was worse than she'd thought. The Marines were trapped in a narrow defile with enemy forces approaching along high ground. Any air attack would have to be precise. A single mistake could hit friendly forces. This was exactly the scenario her father had trained her for. She came in low over the ridgeline, the Warthog's shadow racing across the rocks. There, 3 armored personnel carriers advancing in formation, with a tank bringing up the rear. The enemy hadn't expected an air attack. By the time they started reacting, Mara was already lining up her first pass. The 30mm cannon erupted with a sound like tearing metal. The Ga-8 Avenger fired depleted uranium rounds that punched through armor like paper. The lead BMP shuddered, smoke pouring from its hull, then exploded. Mara banked hard right, pulling up and around for another pass. Tracers arced up toward her, anti-aircraft fire from the remaining vehicles. The Warthog shook as rounds impacted the armored hull, but the aircraft kept flying. That's one down, she transmitted. Repositioning. She came in from a different angle, compensating for their defensive positions. The second BMP tried to maneuver, but the Warthog was more agile than it looked. Mara walked her fire across the vehicle's flank, destroying the track assembly and engine compartment. The tank was rotating its turret toward her. She saw the flash as it fired. Time seemed to slow. Mara broke hard left, the cannon shell passing close enough that she felt the aircraft shudder from the pressure wave. Warning lights flashed on her console. Minor hydraulic damage, but everything essential was still operational. You'll have to do better than that, she muttered. The A-10 had been built to survive this kind of punishment. Redundant systems, multiple flight surfaces, an engine design that could keep running even with catastrophic damage. She came around for a third pass, this time targeting the tank. The 30mm rounds sparked off the tank's frontal armor, too thick even for depleted uranium at this angle. But Mara wasn't aiming for the front. She pulled up sharply, gaining altitude, then rolled into a dive that brought her in behind the tank. The rear armor was thinner, and her angle of attack was nearly vertical. She squeezed the trigger. The cannon roared. Rounds chewed through the tank's engine deck and penetrated the ammunition storage. The tank's turret lifted off its body in a spectacular explosion. Bravo 3-2, that's all primary threats neutralized, Mara transmitted. What's your... We've got infantry moving in. The Marine's voice cracked with desperation. At least 30 hostiles, 300 meters in closing. We're almost out of ammunition. Mara scanned the terrain. They're enemy soldiers advancing in dispersed formation, using the rocks for cover. Too spread out for the cannon to be fully effective. She'd need a different approach. She armed her rockets, unguided 70mm hydropods. Old technology, but in skilled hands, devastatingly accurate. She lined up the attack run, calculating wind speed, distance, and the dispersal pattern she needed. Her father had taught her this. Not from a manual, but from experience. How to read the ground, how to anticipate where soldiers would move, how to place ordnance where it would do the most good with the least risk to friendlies. The first salvo of rockets streaked downrange, impacting in a line across the enemy's advance. Smoke and flame erupted from the hillside. The attack stalled as the enemy scattered. Mara brought the Warthog around again, lower this time, using the terrain to mask her approach. She could see individual soldiers now, scrambling for cover. She triggered another rocket salvo, targeting their fallback positions. The enemy formation broke. Soldiers retreated in disorder, abandoning their attack. Bravo 3-2, hostile forces are withdrawing. You're clear to move. Falcon 2-7. The Marine's voice was rough with emotion. I don't know who you are, but you just saved 15 lives. How do we... Get your wounded to the extraction point, Mara said. I'll maintain overwatch until the evac birds arrive. For the next 40 minutes, she circled above the Marines as they moved through the ravine. Her fuel was getting low, ammunition nearly depleted. But she stayed on station, watching for any sign of renewed attack. When the rescue helicopters finally appeared on the horizon, Mara felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She watched the Marines load their wounded, then form up for extraction. The last Marine on the ground, the one who'd been on the radio, looked up at her circling aircraft and raised his hand in salute. Falcon 2-7, this is Bravo 3-2. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it. Just doing my job, Mara said. Get home safe. She turned the Warthog toward base, the setting sun painting the desert orange and gold. Her hands were steady on the controls, but inside she felt the weight of what she'd done. Not the triumph. That would come later. Right now she just felt tired, and grateful that her father's training had been enough. The radio crackled. Major Garrett's voice, different now, less certain. Falcon 2-7, you are cleared for landing. Be advised that Colonel Pierce wants to see you immediately upon touchdown. Copy that, Mara said. She brought the Warthog in smooth and steady, despite the hydraulic damage. The aircraft had taken multiple hits, but it had brought her home, just like it was designed to. The crew chief was waiting when she climbed down from the cockpit. His eyes were wide as he examined the bullet holes in the fuselage. Lieutenant, you took some serious hits. How did you... The Warthog can take it, Mara said simply. Colonel Pierce was standing near the operations center, arms crossed. Next to him stood Major Garrett, who couldn't quite meet her eyes. Lieutenant Hollins, the colonel said. His voice was neutral, carefully controlled. You violated direct orders. You took an aircraft into a combat zone without authorization. You engaged enemy forces without proper clearance. Mara stood at attention. Yes, sir. You also saved 15 Marines who would otherwise be dead. The colonel's expression softened slightly. The ground commander has already sent a commendation. The Marines you pulled out? One of them is a Medal of Honor recipient. Another is a battalion commander's son. But that's not why what you did mattered. He stepped closer. It mattered because you were the only pilot on this base who knew how to do what needed to be done. While everyone else was looking for the perfect solution, you went with the solution that worked. Major Garrett cleared his throat. Sir, we still have to address the unauthorized Major. The colonel's tone was sharp.
We have to address why Lieutenant Hollins was the only person willing to answer that call. Why she's been sidelined flying an aircraft that everyone treats as a joke. And why I'm only now learning that we have a pilot on this base with her skill level.
He turned back to Mara. You're off flight status pending the investigation, but I'm also recommending you for a Silver Star. And when this is sorted out, we're going to have a conversation about your future in this squadron. Sir, with respect, I don't want a different assignment, Mara said. I want to keep flying the A-10. The colonel studied her face. Why? You could have your pick of aircraft. Why stick with something everyone considers obsolete? Because it's not obsolete, Mara said. It just requires a pilot who understands its mission. My father taught me that the Warthog isn't about being the fastest or the most advanced. It's about staying in the fight when everyone else has to leave. It's about protecting the people on the ground who can't protect themselves. She paused. Those Marines needed someone who could loiter, who could take damage, who could deliver precision strikes in close proximity to friendly forces. No other prac. It'd have done what needed to be done today. Not better. Not even close. The colonel nodded slowly. You make a compelling case, Lieutenant. He glanced at Major Garrett. Maybe we've been too quick to write off older platforms. And the pilots who believe in them. 2 weeks later, the investigation concluded. Mara was cleared of wrongdoing. The urgency of the situation and the successful outcome had outweighed the procedural violations. The Silver Star recommendation moved forward. But more importantly, the Air Force quietly reversed several decisions about the A-10 retirement. Mara's mission had demonstrated capabilities that newer aircraft couldn't replicate. The Warthog would continue flying. Mara stood in the hangar, running her hand along the patched fuselage of her aircraft. The bullet holes had been repaired, but you could still see where the armor had absorbed the impacts. Your father would be proud. She turned to find an older pilot standing behind her, Colonel Richard Thorne, one of her father's old squadron mates. I heard what you did, Thorne continued. Frank always said the A-10 would outlast all the fancy new jets because it was built for a mission that never changes. Turns out he was right. I just did what he taught me, Mara said. No. Thorne shook his head. You did what he would have done. There's a difference. He taught you the skills, but the courage to use them, that was all you. Mara looked back at the aircraft. The Warthog sat there, ungainly and scarred, beautiful in its functionality. They'd mocked her for choosing this aircraft, for dedicating herself to what everyone else considered a relic. But when the call came, when lives hung in the balance, the Warthog and its pilot had been exactly what the situation demanded. Not the fastest, not the newest, just ready when it mattered most. And that, Mara thought, was exactly the point. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.